Sure. Okay, guys, if you're ready to get started, you're very welcome today to this webinar. And the title of this webinar today is the COVID-19 Response, How the Digital and Industry 4.0 Solutions for Biopharma Can Help Us Keep Everything Ticking Over and Running Smoothly in the Biopharma Industry. So we're just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping before we start with the main content. So today we have two speakers. First of all, there's myself. My name's Aoife Barron, and I'm a senior bioprocessing trainer at NIBRT. I'm sure many of you are familiar with NIBRT, but we're based in the grounds of UCD, just off Foster Avenue in Dublin. We have Killian O'Driscoll too, which is our Director of Projects at NIBRT. So he'll be keeping an eye on things today and overseeing the Q&A later on. And we're also joined, of course, by James Morton, who's the Associate Director for Industry 4.0 at BCG. So I assure you, you're in good hands today. So next slide. Okay, so just a little bit about rules of engagement for the webinar. I'm sure you're all very, very used to WebEx, Zoom, and everything like that at this stage. But just to keep everything running smoothly, we're going to ask that people keep their cameras off, with the exception of maybe the speakers for today. Just keep the cameras off, and you'll notice that you're either muted, or try to keep yourself muted if you can for the duration of the session, and then we can open up the floor for some verbal Q&A later on. We are recording this webinar, so I hope that's okay with everybody, and we'll be sharing the webinar then with the attendees after the session, so you can listen to it again at your convenience. And if you would like to submit a question, we already got some in advance, which was fantastic, but if you want to submit any questions after hearing the content today, just simply type the question into the chat box, and we will have Killian as mediator, and we can go through those questions at the end. You might also notice as well on the participants view on your screen, beside your name, there's a little raise hand function. This is very handy as well, just in case you're having connectivity issues or you're having difficulty hearing people throughout the presentation. It's a good way just to notify us that you're having any technical issues, and we can try and rectify them. In the presentation today as well, there are a few videos embedded in the presentation, so fingers crossed they all play without problem. But if you're finding it difficult, again, with bandwidth issues and so forth, if you're finding it difficult to see those videos, we can always send those out to you later on as well, if you'd prefer to look at them maybe later on. So please do let us know, again, if you're having any difficulties in that regard. Okay, so the objectives for today. So this is a relatively short webinar. We're going to keep it to maybe about 30-35 minutes of presentation by myself and James. But we are going to open the floor, as we say, to some Q&A for maybe about 10 minutes after the end. So maybe about 45 minutes in total. But the aims of this webinar today are to, first of all, just introduce the Biopharma 4.0 Innovation Centre, or ICO for short. Again, some of you might be familiar that we have this ICO set up at the NIBRT facility. And it was a joint venture on behalf of BCG and NIBRT. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to introduce to you some digital use cases that are applicable to the biopharma industry, as well, I suppose, as some other industries, but we're going to focus, of course, on biopharma. And especially in the wake of the COVID-19 outbreak, some of these 4.0 industry technologies that can really help us to make sure that there's minimal impact, I suppose, on production in our industry. And then at the end, of course, once you start talking about 4.0, there's a world of information out there. There's great ideas, there's great solutions out there, and we probably won't have the time to go through them all today. But we are very eager to hear maybe what you're doing as part of your own jobs, or what your company have embraced over the last few months. So if you would like to share any of those ideas, or if you want maybe some further information or further discussion about any of the topics, please do let us know, share those ideas with us, and we can open the floor again to attendees at a later date. Okay, so first off, just to introduce the Biopharma 4.0 Innovation Centre for Operations. So it's a bit of a mouthful, so we call it the B4.0 ICO at NIBRT. So this is a partnership between NIBRT and BCG, and we've been creating this, or establishing this ICO at NIBRT for the past 2 years. And we have eventually and finally kind of set it up at the NIBRT facility now, and opened it up for tours and training for people to come visit us and see what it's all about. So the ICO brings cutting edge digital technology to the biopharma industry. A lot of you might be familiar with some of these technologies potentially in other industries, but as you know, the biopharma industry can be maybe a little bit sluggish in introducing some of these technologies due to the fact that there's lots of regulatory and validatory issues around their implementation. But the idea of the ICO is that you can come visit us, you can see the technologies, you can play around with them. It's very interactive and it's very immersive. So you can see how these technologies can impact positively, I'm sure, the biopharma industry. So the reason for the partnership, of course, is that BCG have a great amount of expertise in Industry 4.0 and advanced technologies, which James will talk to you more about. And NIBRT, as most of you might be familiar with, we have expertise in GMP and training. So we are a training facility in all aspects of GMP and biopharma. And NIBRT then, of course, have provided that physical facility for the ICO. So as well as conducting our regular training curricula and portfolio, we have now broadened that and opened the floor up to 4.0 capabilities. Okay, so the use cases that we're going to present to you today, of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There's plenty of other use cases that you could probably talk about today, but we're going to present to you these few. So first up, we're going to talk about rapid diagnostic testing at the site entrance in the form of temperature sensors and temperature monitoring. We'll have a look at virtual reality as well as augmented reality for things like training, for expert capture of knowledge and the creation of digital SOPs. We'll bring to you some virtual online training programs. And again, as I say, we're all quite used to WebEx and Zoom, but maybe how can we use this a little bit more than just for meetings? So how do we use it to ensure training and things like that in terms of operator training, lab training? How do we keep up to speed with all of that by using virtual programs now that we're not physically on site? We'll look at remote approval of documentation, remote expert support for things like maintenance and calibrations, remote audits and inspections, 3D digital twin and virtual site tours, which are very, very popular, especially when you can't physically be at a site. Computer vision for human behavior, managing supply chain disruption, and looking at things like shift handover and digital tier boards to make sure that everybody on site is aware of what's going on in the production facility, even if they're not physically present on site. Okay, excellent. So we'll start with the temperature monitoring. So the use case or the problem, I suppose, that we can present to you here in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic is how do you keep your workforce safe from contracting COVID while still maintaining production output? We do have the problem now that we're not all physically on site all the time. Many of us are being asked to work from home where possible because we want to avoid contact, we want to avoid too many people on the site at one time. But how do you approach the concept of people coming back on site and keeping everybody else on site safe at the same time? So you've probably seen this maybe on TV at airports and things like that, but we've brought it now onto site here at NIBRT as well to track people's temperature as they come onto site, so as they approach the facility. So what we have is infrared camera technology, and for want of a better term, it looks like a CCTV camera that's mounted just at the entrance. And as people approach it, I think you might only have to stand in front of it for maybe a second or two, and it takes your temperature automatically, and that can be then cast to a screen maybe at reception where people are monitoring the temperature of people coming on site. It also uses machine learning and artificial intelligence to detect if there's something, an outlier perhaps, that's maybe creating an elevated temperature. Like if you have a cup of hot coffee in front of your face as you walk through the entrance, it'll pick up that that's not a human body and that it's something different. So it has the ability to be able to detect those anomalies. So the idea here is, I guess, that you are catching a problem at source rather than maybe allowing somebody who is experiencing those COVID symptoms to enter a site and then maybe avoiding the need to use maybe contact tracing apps while the person has physically been at the site. So you are stopping what could be potentially a health problem at source before the person has the chance to enter the facility. So we have, as I said, implemented this at NIBRT, so we'll see how it goes. We used a company called FeverTech, and they installed the camera equipment system that is manufactured by Hikvision, as you can see in the images there. Okay, so next slide. Okay, and I have to be biased. I think this one is my own personal favorite, but as a trainer at NIBRT, we have had the challenge now of trying to keep our training going and trying to keep on top of things at NIBRT and make sure people still gain the same experience of training while we're all working from home. So the problem here is, how can I upskill and train my workforce remotely or pre-installation, so pre those personnel actually working on site and in a GMP environment. So we have very successfully built this virtual reality training program into our training curricula, and it is one of the most popular things that we can showcase to people when they actually visit the facility. But of course, the idea is that you can do this from the comfort of your own home as well. If any of you aren't familiar with virtual reality, the idea with VR is that you can put a headset on, a set of goggles or a headset, and you are completely immersed in a different world. So you are, it's kind of like online gaming, I guess. You're completely immersed into a new world where you can use your hand movements and you can conduct different tasks in this virtual reality setting. So it's much more immersive than just, say, standard video learning. So what you can see from the video here, and this was created by a company called Mercis, who are based in Athlone, did a fantastic job of completely recreating our seed lab or inoculation lab at NIBRT. So we can train people on how to do things like media prep. You can see there they're taking the cells out of the working cell bank, inoculating a flask of media with those cells, and becoming trained on things like aseptic technique and aseptic processing, while the trainee is still physically in the training room or in the comfort of their own home, and they're not physically in the GMP space, potentially causing an issue in terms of contamination over time. So this allows people to train on something, self-led training as well, which is very important, without the need to be physically present with the trainer. They can run through an entire curricula of training at their own speed and using their own initiative. You can also make this a kind of a gamified learning experience where you're scored or where you are ranked depending on how well you perform in some of the tasks. And then you get instant real-time feedback as a result of this. There's many other industries in the life science sector that have actually employed this very well up until this point. One that springs to mind is a company called Bausch & Strobel. And those of you who are involved in the fill finish space might be familiar with them as manufacturers of filling lines and isolators. But they have very, very successfully created a series of VR and AR, which is augmented reality, training programs for operators performing tasks on filling lines, as well as things like maintenance technicians. So I think we're going to see VR and augmented reality much more in the future. So next slide. Okay, so now that we've explained VR, we can move on to augmented reality. And again, if people aren't familiar with augmented reality, it is similar in the sense to VR, as where you are looking at a set of visuals, but this time you are still physically present in the area that you're working, let's say a clean room facility. And by wearing a set of goggles, such as the HoloLens or the RealWear headset, as you can see the people in the video wearing, there is just a series of images that are overlaid on your real life view. So you're still physically present in the space, but you're getting some extra information fed to you through those goggles or through those glasses. So you can use this for a number of different reasons. What we've presented here is the PTC Vuforia Expert Capture. So this allows you to wear a headset, perform a task on the floor, and it's all voice commanded. So the problem here is, I suppose, how can I share these best practices during COVID restrictions when everybody's not physically in the same room? So you as the operator wearing these glasses can perform the task. You can voice command yourself, dictating what you're doing and relaying that expert information and recording it on this headset, which can later then be transcribed into an SOP for people to follow later on. So the expert is dictating that knowledge that perhaps is not always very well captured in a physical SOP and relaying that information for people who might need it later on. You can also use this as a pretty effective training tool. So kind of going back to the previous topic, and again, this is something that NIBRT are starting to use more and more now, where we have a group of trainees present on site, but we can't physically be close to each other in order to be able to demonstrate something properly. So you can still use these headsets and one-on-one demonstrate a task and cast or display what the person is visually seeing through the headset onto a wider screen, so that people can physically see you doing something in real time while still maintaining social distancing. So it's a very effective training tool as well as remote expert capture. So next slide. Okay, and again, of course, this is something very close to our own heart at NIBRT. This is one thing that has allowed us to continue our training without really missing a beat during all this COVID outbreak. So we're now looking at more and more virtual and online training programs, and this is a project that has been ongoing at NIBRT now for quite some time as well. We went live with this in January 2020 with the NOA, which is the NIBRT Online Academy. So this provides you with a number of different e-learning modules on key aspects for biopharma manufacturing, which, depending on maybe your company ideals or company conditions or requirements, you can build something like this into your company's own learning management system. So you can build in a series of theory, you can build in a series of maybe virtual reality or AR solutions onto this system as well. And what we're presenting now is a series of different 45 to 60-minute interactive and assess modules, allowing people to learn the basics maybe first of all, before they physically have to go on site to do the on-the-job training. On this as well, we have recorded webinars and videos. So you have a variety of different learning styles that are accommodated for with this as well. This is also updated each quarter. So as we go through the months throughout the year, we're getting more and more topics that people are asking for and demanding. Especially now in the wake of COVID-19, people want to learn more about things like viruses, hand washing technique, and vaccine production. So we have created a series of free webinars that you can register for and log on to view on the online academy. And you can see we've given you the link there, bottom right hand of the screen. So again, just like the virtual reality training solutions, it allows you to train up your workforce, at least initially, before you can physically complete the on-the-job training when people are physically on site. But it allows you to get up to speed a little bit quicker. Down on the bottom right hand corner there, I must say I'm a bit biased in putting this in, but there's another kind of online training platform, as well as Zoom and WebEx and all the others we've been using, called the LearnCube. And the reason I put this in here is that I'm actually a student of the Dublin Photography School who use this. And previously they had to do all of their training physically on site, and now they have gone to doing all of their classes remotely using this LearnCube, meaning that, again, they never skipped a beat. They never had any issues with any drop in revenue as regards business opportunities because of this. So I think we are going to be leaning a little bit more on these virtual training programs as well in the future. If you'd like to try this out, I recommend that you try at least one of our free courses. You can register for the bioreactor operations course. We can send you on the link if you're interested. And again, you can request to build this into your learning management system on site as well, if you so wish. Okay, so next slide. Okay. So the last one I'm going to present before I hand you over to James is remote approval of documentation. And of course, the problem here is that we're not all physically on site to be able to sign off the multitude of documentation that is placed in front of us in terms of batch review, maybe IQ, OQ, PQ review. There's lots of documentation that needs physical signatures. And following on from the request of most companies to go fully paperless, what we're now, of course, faced with is the task of electronic signatures. And one of the main issues with some electronic signature applications is that they're not all 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. But this one very much is. This is called DocuSign. So the idea here is that it's an online portal where you can upload your documentation. And that, of course, might ring warning bells for people uploading very sensitive information. But all of the documentation that's uploaded is encrypted. So it's all fully secure, abiding by the ISO 27001 certification, which is the highest level of global information security assurance available today. So with the ability to physically sign something like this online, it also allows you to put in a reason for a signature, which is sometimes not always available in some of the electronic signature packages used in the industry. So you can, again, put in things like entry errors. You can say why you're approving the documentation. and have that visible in that e-signature, as you can see there on the slide. So being able to do this means that you, again, never skip a beat in terms of production. It reduces cycle times for review and approval. There are no longer delays, hopefully, in waiting for people to sign documentation. People can have automatic reminders sent to their phones to remind them that the document is waiting signatures. So the idea is, again, with all 21 CF4 Part 11 compliance systems, that it's fully traceable and fully then reliable in terms of batch release. Okay, so now I'm going to hand you over to James, and he's going to bring you through the remaining use cases.
Thanks, Aoife. Hello, everyone. So as Aoife said, I'm James Morton, Associate Director with BCG in London, and specialise in industry for particularly in biopharma manufacturing. So the first use case I'm going to talk to you about is remote expert support for maintenance. Now, many of you will be familiar with this, but during the COVID crisis, this has obviously become much more important and much more relevant. So the classic use case, struggling to get the right maintenance expertise on site during the crisis, obviously with travel restrictions, not possible to fly in OEM global experts. You may have your experts isolating at home, and just generally trying to reduce the number of people on site. And there's a whole number of technologies, both different hardware and different software out there to help with this, depending on your situation. So just to talk through a couple, I mean, when we first started demoing the remote experts, a lot of it was done just with an iPad or even an iPhone. And in terms of scalability, often that's still a very, very helpful way to do it. I think if you want your technicians to be more hands-free, the RealWear head-mounted tablet is a really nice, simple solution that just it's robust, it's safe, and it doesn't block your vision, and actually it's really works very well with voice activation and stuff. The more advanced, moving towards the sort of the HoloLens 2, obviously gives a little bit more capability in terms of augmented reality. So then in terms of software, I mean, again, in terms of scalability, if you already have Zoom or WebEx or Teams, you can still use all of these software for this. There are more advanced software that allow you to annotate in 3 dimensions, which can be really useful with complex equipment. So to explain that a little bit more, if you are showing an expert some equipment, you can annotate that equipment on the screen, but the expert can also annotate a different part of the equipment, and the software actually fixes that annotation in augmented real space. So as you move around that equipment, that annotation doesn't move. So it's a really helpful way of just speeding up and making more accurate the advice you're getting. But like I say, some of the simpler platforms that you may already have set up for your businesses can also support this. I think also just worth saying, this was pre-COVID, this was a valuable use case. Obviously, it allows you to reduce the number of and the range of expertise you need to have on shift on site at any one time, and the speed at which you can get your equipment back up and running. Okay. So along similar lines, so I won't go through all of the hardware and software options again, but during COVID, obviously, you still need to be able to carry out for inspections and audits to be carried out, keep licenses and maintain approvals. So one of the things that we found work quite well, where we've not been able to visit a site, but actually being able to do a site tour with someone, either using an HMT or an iPad, just so you can go and see what's happening in the room live. You can see some of the visual management, see some of the behaviors, just to keep things moving. So again, the RealWear, HoloLens, iPad, all good tools for that, and a number of the software options can work. So WebEx, Zoom, and Microsoft Teams, particularly if you're having a large group, can be most effective for that. So this one is more around an actual virtual tour of facility. So you know the score, your colleagues, new leaders, contractors, you know, a project team looking at the whole network, want to visit all the sites. Everyone loves to do a site visit from head office, and typically you might have found 50 to 100 visitors to a site on a weekly basis. Now, previously that was just a distraction and and costly, but now obviously that's a big risk, bringing in those extra people, and it's hard to do those tours whilst maintaining social distance. So what this technology is, it's actually reasonably simple. It's literally a Google Street View of a plant, right? So you essentially walk around with the plant with a 360-degree camera and take hundreds of 360-degree shots. And then the software pieces that together into a virtual tour, but it's not a full 3D model. It's literally a number of 3D 360-degree photos. So once you've built up that, and it's, you know, you can do this in a day and perhaps do it at the weekend so that the plant is empty. You build up your 3D tour, and then in terms of hardware, you know, at the advanced end, an Oculus Quest would give you the best user experience, but an iPhone and a $5 Google Cardboard gives you a very good idea of the tour, and you can also do it on your desktop. So it's something I know is very useful before, but now I think is really helpful for reducing those visits to the site. Savings on travel, environmental impact is an added bonus, and just little things I've found with the one in NIBRT is, if you want to just check the layout of a room or see how much space there is somewhere, you can actually measure on the thing. So the number of times I've avoided a flight to Dublin just to be able to check something in the facility quickly, or get a feel, or show a contractor what a room looks like, it's been really useful. Okay, next one. So once you've got your team back on site, you're starting to up the numbers and the capacity. How do you ensure that the social distancing is working? And you know, and how can you monitor that adherence and check that you're setting up the site in a way that supports that? So this is not so much about checking up on whether people are doing social distance, but identifying hot spots on your site where people are finding it difficult to social distance, whether that be in an intersection of corridors, or in the canteen, or at the coffee machines. And these are all then ways that you can then, once you've identified those hotspots, you can mitigate that, put in one-way flows, add additional places, change phase timings for breaks, etc., to make sure that you're improving the chance of that social distancing being successful. So there's a couple of technologies for doing that. You can use GPS technology and getting a location on people. We've also seen with computer vision, which previously we were using in the Innovation Centre for monitoring human behaviours in aseptic setting. Just adapting that to monitor for distance between individuals. So a couple of options there on how to do that. Okay, so we have one here on supply chain. Now we could have an entire webinar just on supply chain during COVID. So we just wanted to have one in there almost as a placeholder, just to flag, but definitely not exhaustive here. Obviously, there's a huge amount of supply chain disruption from COVID, and the number of disruption means it's really important to be able to prioritize those and to mitigate the issues, understand the status of your inventory and when things may and how you react to those disruptions. and part of that is obviously this end-to-end visibility of the supply chain. So the more you can integrate the data feeds from your suppliers and your customers and understand that the states of inventory, etc., the more quickly you can understand what is a real issue or what actually is just going to eat into some strategic stock and won't become an issue for another few months. So there's a few systems able to do that. I'm not going to go into detail about any specific one, but don't forget the importance of of maintaining the supply chain upstream for the operation of the plants. Okay, I think we've got one more. So yeah, back in the plant. So daily tier boards and shift handover. So I think everyone realizes the value of these tier boards and of visual management and KPIs. And prior to COVID, there was a move towards trying to do this more digitally, allowing for simpler and automated updating of the data, and being able to allow people to access that meeting remotely and escalate issues between meetings seamlessly. I think there's been a massive acceleration of that during COVID. And just the reality of you can't really have 10 to 15 people stood around a visual management board and then going on to a series of tiered meetings. Also, having paper on the wall that's being handled, handover notebooks, post-it notes, all this stuff is a bit of a no-no. So there's two tools here that I think were worth mentioning. One of them is just a simple visual management electronic visual management board, and what this does, it allows you to pull in a number of data sources for the key KPIs, some of them from direct from a system through an API, but also if it's easier just to pull that from a simple Excel sheet or even just manually entering it as you would coloring in a piece of paper on a board. It's really easy to do all of those things, and any user with the right rights can come in and update that data. And then on the right hand side, you've got the agenda mapped out, all of the actions, issues, and anything you want to escalate to higher team meetings or vice versa. So super flexible, really easy to set up and really scalable. And the important thing is it allows people to, some people can be there in the plant during the meeting, other people can be looking and updating the board remotely. And others maybe stood a little bit further away looking at it a second screen or on their iPad, all super possible. So it's a nice solution. And then on the handover side, obviously you want to minimize the amount that two shifts overlap because you want to try and keep them isolated, but you obviously need to keep up those chains of communication, and having notebooks, etc., is not a good way of doing that. So having an application that allows that seamless communication and handover really important at this time. And I think good behaviors to be getting into. I think a lot of these use cases will stand in good stead for post-COVID. We can accelerate the digital revolution. Okay, so just taking a step back then. Just to talk about the ICA, like today we focused on some of the use cases that we've heard from clients and suppliers that have really been very useful during COVID and where we've seen an acceleration of adoption. What we do as part of the ICO is obviously much broader than that. So we've got over 30 use cases being demonstrated across the 5 workstations of the Innovation Center, and we have our sort of Bible of over 90 use cases that we think are relevant to biopharma, and over 200 suppliers that can help with that. And I think I just wanted to say as well that I know sometimes we show logos of technology providers, but the idea is that this is technology agnostic. So we're not wedded to any particular platform. We're not a distributor, and we're never in any exclusive partnerships with suppliers. So the idea is that we try and maintain total independence to be able to advise clients on types of technologies are out there, and importantly, what's actually going to bring the most value to them. So we're not trying to sell a large integration project out of that. It's about Industry 4 strategy, the end-to-end digital workflow, and delivering a step change in performance from your digital strategy. So look, there's 3 ways to get involved if you're interested in hearing about broader Industry 4 use cases. We've got the immersive tour of the 5 digital workstations, which obviously is tricky at the moment, but we have tours booked in for the end of the summer, and that's essentially can be anything from a half day through to 2 days, where we go through and physically experience all the different use cases, and we can combine that with a workshop around your specific situation. NIBRT obviously experts in training, and we've built a curriculum around Industry 4 in biopharma, either by technology, by workstation, or we can tailor that to fit. And some of our clients have become much more involved and are members of what we call the Biopharma 4.0 Alliance, which just allows us to work a bit more closely, support in some pilots, either at NIBRT or on the client site, and provide a bit more support around business cases and platforms. So just wanted to give you the context of the overall innovation center, of which today was just a part of. Okay.
Okay, thanks, James and Aoife. Killian here. So I've been monitoring the questions that have been coming in. So thank you everybody for that. And in the 5 minutes remaining, there's been a good few questions. So I might just take the most popular questions. And James, this first one is probably for you. Quite a few questions there on what technology solutions would you recommend to get remote support? So people were talking about that they want to get a maintenance engineer or a subject matter expert, but that person is obviously subject to travel restrictions, can't travel on site. So what technology solutions would you recommend to address such a situation?
So the one we demonstrate in NIBRT is Vuforia Chalk, because I think it's the most advanced we've seen in terms of the annotation and the the augmented reality part. But if I'm honest, I wouldn't let the choice of technology or the sophisticatedness of the technology get in the way of progressing quickly on this. Like I say, I think any video platform on the right hardware, the hardware is important because of where you're using it, but any video conference platform realistically is going to be appropriate for having a video conversation with someone. It's very easy to flick between viewing you and showing them equipment, and although the annotation may be a bit more tricky, it's not that hard to point at something on the video and have them agree that is the part. So I wouldn't. There are more advanced ones, and particularly where you're running a field force of engineers and you want to be able to track the activities and the advice that you've given. There are more advanced solutions, and I can dig some of those out and send them over. But if it's literally I have a specific issue, I want to start using video, I would use whatever your company platform is, whether that's Teams, WebEx, Zoom, FaceTime. If you want to go a bit more advanced, the Vuforia Chalk, I think, have a free offer on it. I think it's free to use it for a few minutes anyway, but I think at the moment during COVID they're making it free for everyone. So and that's simple to set up. You log in and you can call each other. But obviously the most simple is your existing video conference solutions. Yeah, in terms of hardware, if it's not in an area where you can take iPads, iPhones, that's a good start. Having a stand to put it on so you keep your hands free is helpful, and then you progress into I think the HMT is probably the most robust solution for hands-free and where you need to be able to walk around. I think the HoloLens is incremental on top of the HMT. Does that answer the question?
Thanks, James. Yeah, I think that's a good summary. And then Aoife, kind of a two-part question to you. A lot of questions from folks on the line about how do you keep staff current with new processes, new procedures? How do you reinforce key messages around aseptic behaviours? And in particular, people are just interested in finding out further information about the NIBRT Online Academy. And then the second part to the question is the experiences that we've had with virtual reality as a training and education tool. So perhaps you can address those two parts, please.
Well, first up, with keeping up to date with training modules and aseptic behaviours. The thing about any of the modules that you train on in terms of GMP, the thing is the little C before the GMP and keeping everything current. So that's a very good question. I think especially when it comes to aseptic behaviours, something like virtual reality can be very, very beneficial. And I think we saw that very well with the virtual reality simulation that was made for us as part of the ICO by Mercis with the virtual reality BSE setup for cell culture. It's something quite simple, really, in its format, even though, of course, the work that went into it was enormous to create this very lifelike representation of what we have at NIBRT. But what you're trying to do is quite simple in instructing people how to use basic sanitization techniques, wipe down techniques, and basic things like movement. It has traditionally been something that's very difficult to police and very difficult to train on in terms of the industry. But I think if people can use something that much more interactive, much even gamified, as I mentioned in the webinar, something that allows people to rate themselves and score themselves on, rather than something that can be very dictatorial in the sense of a trainer-led session. Something that is a little bit more fun and enjoyable for people to train on, like a virtual reality gamified simulation, I think can get the message across very well, and you can make it much more visual. So for anybody who's done, for example, training with ourselves on site in aseptic technique, we try to be as visual as possible in the sense of talking about airflow and airflow visualization studies for aseptic areas. But when you're doing it in virtual reality, you can overlay the visuals that you're seeing with some very good graphics that can really get that message home. So I think something like aseptic behaviours, you just have to try to make it as interactive as possible for people to get that benefit out of, because it is a very difficult thing for people to train on. The NOAA platform, are very, very interested to talk to people about this more if they want, and I can put you in direct contact with the people who are involved in NOAA from the NIBRT side. But maybe one thing I forgot to say was that the NOAA platform is fully SCORM compliant. So I think for LMS systems in industry, it has to be SCORM compliant in order to be able to register people's training correctly and efficiently. I think the online training has been hugely successful for us. So not only, of course, have we been very successful in training people physically on site, but the NOAA online system allows us to train people in a variety of different areas where maybe people can't come to site so easily, even without the COVID upset, even people who might have to travel from afar normally to reach the NIBRT site. Now we're able to reach a much wider audience. With the NOAA Online Academy as well, you can create your own curricula of the training that you see. So we have a huge number of different modules on offer. But you can, once you register for the system, you can create a very personalized curricula for yourself. And you can get yourself your online certification. And again, it's all kind of pass, what am I trying to say? It's all limit scored, so you have to say get 80% or more in order to pass the course. That's what I'm trying to say. So you can kind of form yourself a curricula and a scoring system, again kind of creating something that's that little bit more interactive and gamified, that allows people to get more involved in their own training. For some of these systems traditionally, I think you would have had to log on from your work computer in order to complete some of these courses. But now with NOAA, you're really kind of getting that opportunity to do that from home if necessary, as we all have to do nowadays. I've kind of spoken now about the value of VR as a training tool. I have heard people in the past, all right, say that VR can be difficult sometimes to integrate into a training because it is hugely immersive, as in you're going into a completely different environment. It can be difficult to build something that looks and feels exactly like the type of tools or equipment you're trying to work on, and that maybe augmented reality might be a simpler solution that might not take as long to build in. But I think, as I mentioned before, VR can be a very great tool in maybe creating an environment that is very difficult to replicate physically in the normal world, I suppose you can say. So I hope that answers your questions.
I think it's also worth mentioning on the VR that because of the nature of the content, it's very scalable. As in, once you have that training curriculum, you could send it out to across your whole network. The hardware is not super expensive, and obviously reusable. I think creating that content is expensive though. So one of the challenges is finding a way to get a few pharma companies together to create the content at scale, or even getting GE Sartorius to create some of that content for their equipment that then can be used across companies, because everyone needing to create their own VR training is going to be prohibitively expensive, I think.
Yeah, but there are certain packages that you can get that I suppose the term would be kind of generic or agnostic, as we've used before, whereas you can buy into an aseptic training package, for example, that can be applicable anywhere. Of course, if you want to customize it, absolutely, it starts to rise in dollar signs. But some of the technology that we use even in the ICO tours for VR is very simple. So going back to what James presented in terms of the virtual reality tours, you can use that once it's built based on using a simple app on your phone, and maybe using the Google Cardboard glasses, which helps create almost like an Oculus Quest or Oculus Rift. It's a very simple headset that costs about €10 that you slip your phone into, and you immediately are then faced with a virtual reality world. So it depends, I suppose, how far you want to go into the technology. Some of the technology is very expensive. The hardware can be, not exorbitantly so, but you can have the opportunity to create quite simple, quite achievable and affordable VR solutions in a shorter space of time with different technologies that are available.
Great, thanks James, thanks Aoife. Just having a look at the time, and we're 5 minutes over, so there's quite a range of questions that we haven't got to, but I think in the interest of time we should probably wrap it up. James, do you might just talk to people just to close it out about if people want to find out further information, what's the best way to do that, and then we can close the webinar there.
James, you're on mute, I think.
Thank you. We can circulate, I think we have recorded the session today, so we'll circulate an email to the attendees afterwards with a link to that recording and some contact details for you to get in touch. Great. We'd love to hear anything we felt we forgot or left out, or something that you found useful. We'd love to hear about, and we'd be happy to play that back to the rest of the group in an email if we hear a few.
Great. Okay. Thanks, James. Thanks, Aoife. I think we can probably wrap it up then. And thanks to everybody for attending.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Talk to you soon.
Cheers.